CashFlow Diary Podcast, episode 442.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other CashFlow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because did you know that when it comes to building your cash flow, when it comes to building your business, when it comes to, and I know some of you think this way, I am going to be the king or queen of my empire. As you're out there making those things happen, did you know that there's something that's really big, but yet is only 3 letters that can get in your way? You're like, what is that? Well, yes, it's you, but more specifically, your ego. You're like, what? I don't have an ego. I'm great. Yes, that's exactly why we're talking about that today. I have with me today someone who has literally written the book on ego-free leadership. And that's actually the title, because the subtitle, which I think is also good, is Ending the Unconscious Habit That Hijack Your Business. So what he's really saying is you don't even know you're doing it to you. So I hope you are ready to listen and to learn, because I have with me none other than Shayne Hughes. He's the co-author of the book, Ego-Free Leadership. Now, understand a couple of things about Shayne. His company, they've worked with individuals such as Fairchild Semiconductor, NASA, Sandia, Shell Oil, Capital One. I mean, they deal with very large companies where there can be very large egos. But if you have the desire to grow your company to be like one of those large companies, probably you are what's in the way. So I hope you're ready to learn big lessons from big business so that you can become a bigger, better person, business owner, and friend, I will say, because I'm guessing it's going to have some effect there too, to everyone that you come in contact with. So break out those pens, those iPads, those notepads, or whatever you're using, and help me welcome Shayne Hughes. Shayne, you there?
I am, yes.
How you doing, sir?
I am excellent today. Thank you.
Good. So this being the first time that you are here, I have a question for you that I tend to ask everybody the first time that they're here. You ready?
I am.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. And because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. Chief among them, as an entrepreneur, occasionally I can close my eyes and imagine myself wearing maybe capes and tights and flying around town and saving our customers, rescuing them with our products and services. Also, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you think about, say, Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, trying to get some good grades, you know, maybe taking a few photos, have some pizza money, take a girl out every now and again. And then one day he gets bit by the spider and decides, or discovers, I should say, that he's got a special ability. And now he has to make a decision. Am I going to use it for good or evil? So my question to you is as follows. Before, you being, the you are today, before working with NASA, before Sandia, before writing the book, before even becoming fluent in French, what we want to know is, who is Shayne Hughes?
There you go. That's a question I haven't been asked in a while. I thought you were going to ask me what my spider bite was.
We're getting to that. But right now, I want to know about where you started, sir.
Oh. Well, I started as a little kid who moved a lot, who was often new, was skinny, had a funny name, and didn't feel like I fit in. often got picked on and bullied. And as I grew up, kind of stuffed away the soft side and the feelings and pains I had, and grew a bit of a rough, aggressive exterior, self-medicated a bit, and just tried to divorce what felt vulnerable on the inside from what I showed to the outside, and played that game about as hard and as long as I could until I was really forced by life to stop and start making some changes, and been trying to pick up the pieces ever since. Interesting.
Got it. Because it's interesting when I've asked lots of entrepreneurs that question, and there's a common theme for many of us in the sense of where we start versus where we are today. Very few say, "Oh, I was the captain of the football team, and I was the most popular kid in school," and all of these things. Most of us have not been that. So I find this very, very interesting. But you said something that kind of struck a chord. You said, "Forced by life to make changes." What does that mean?
Well, I think I was headed down a path, and that had a lot of recklessness, a lot of anger. I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley, and so I was doing okay on the outside, but in fact was partying a lot, self-medicating a lot, in a way that felt normal compared to my peer group. And I think that if I could have just hung out and kept on doing that and getting by, I don't know that I ever would have made any changes. And, sometimes life knocks at the door, and at least I have a tendency to ignore it. And then it knocks a little louder, and I ignore it a little longer. And then finally, life knocks the door in. And so I felt like that happened the summer I turned 19, where on a different levels emotionally, things that were happening at school. I got the spider bite for me. I think ultimately the last straw was I get pulled over for a DUI, and I just had this moment of I'm not getting there. I'm not making progress. And on top of it, I don't have any idea what to do about it. And that moment of powerlessness and desperation was really a pivot for me. And so then as I actually encountered at that young age the work that I still teach now, there were a lot of moments along the way in which it was very hard and uncomfortable to make these internal changes that I needed to make, and that were part of my path. But I had a sense that there wasn't really any going back. The bridges behind me were burned, not so much in terms of relationships, but in terms of there's just no way out of that. There's no way out alive down that path. So it's forward or bust. And so I've just kept on walking forward with a lot of falls and deviations and cul-de-sacs along the way.
Right. I like that. Before we get too much further, because there's a lot that I want to talk about what you guys are doing, about the book, etc. But you said, I think, 3 key things that I thought a lot of people are probably feeling to some degree, especially as they go out there to try to build their business. I mean, you described this idea of powerlessness and then feeling the need, or this desire to have some internal changes, and that there's no going back. And I think for a lot of people, when we are first beginning to build a business, or maybe we're at a few $1 million of revenue right now, and we're trying to get to that next level, you're done with the 7-figure and you're ready for the 8-figure world, and you can feel like, how can I, because I know me, I'm over here, and how can I get to that next level? How can I become something completely new? And I think for all of us, there's a true transformation in that process of becoming someone new. So my question to you is, through that process, how did you discover the superhero inside, if you will? Because it sounds like there was, a process over time.
Yeah, well, there's so many ways that to answer that question. It's a deep question. And there's been a lot of stages because, this moment I'm describing was 25 years ago. But I think the first thought that comes to mind is that I don't think even in there's this funny thing that brings us back to the ego, really. There's different threads to the ego, but definitely one of but the way we define that is a preoccupation with self-worth. So in any given moment, an interaction like this, working with clients, working with a board, with our spouse or partner, it's that voice in our head that's chirping away, that's evaluating our worth, our competency, our value, what you think of me or not. And it's, judging myself part of the time and then judging everybody else the rest of the time. And that actually takes up a lot of brain space. And what's interesting about it is that it really has two threads. There's an offensive superhero ego, which is, seeing ourselves as this unbelievable, fabulous, brilliant person. Like when I came up with the idea of writing this book, I just had this vision of how extraordinary the book was going to be, right? And then there's the shadow side to that, which is the critic, and who am I fooling? I'm a fraud. I don't really have what it takes. I'm not really qualified. People are going to discover that produces this anxiety around failure. And these two things go together all the time. We can't have one without the other. We have this obsession with success and this terror of failure. And I think that translates also into our sense of self. Like I have this image of myself as amazing, and then I have this other image of myself as a fraud. And so in that, it's hard actually to be balanced and honest with who we really are and what our strengths and weaknesses are. And I say that because there's a way in which I never really live up to my fantasy of how good I think I could be.
Right. And
at the same time, when I look back, I think, wow, I can't believe what's been created here, what I've done. And so I think we both totally overestimate ourselves in a certain way. Like tomorrow I should already be incredible. And then I think long term, we tend to underestimate, or at least I do, really what we're capable of. That even our vision of potential is less than what we could create if we really show up with everything we have to offer.
Yeah, totally understood. And I think to some degree, there's even a bit of I'm afraid to step into the greatness that I feel like I was born to be. So what would happen if I actually gave it my all and then don't actually become as great as I envisioned? So we leave ourselves this out of, I didn't give it my all, so it's okay that I wasn't all that I envisioned. But I'm curious to know, how do you, if you're going to write a book on ego-free leadership, you got to have a definition. Like, what's ego?
Right. So ego is, because there's a lot of words out there. So the one simple way we define it is what I was saying a minute ago, which is this preoccupation with self-worth, this constant attention we have to us in
okay,
this.
but hold on 1 second. When you say a preoccupation with self-worth, what does that sound like? What does that look like? Because I'm trying to come up with a visual picture or a person or think of something that goes, oh, okay, now I get what you mean.
So do you have the experience of being in a situation and, interacting with someone or trying to take on something new, and there's a part of your mind that's distracted because it's criticizing yourself, it's judging the outcome, it's not good enough yet, and what if it's that, and what do other people think about this, and is this other person doing better than I am, and are they judging me? You have that sensation of that voice that's sort of constantly flowing along in the background.
Got it. Now I understand.
That's what I'm talking about. And the thing is, sometimes that voice is kind of distant, it's just kind of there quietly whispering, but sometimes it's so loud that we can't even see what's right in front of us. We can't hear the other person. So it can actually take up, it can be obsessive. It can take up a lot of space.
Got it. So let me ask this then, because you said something that I think to be very, very true, especially when someone's getting started. How does one make that voice quiet. I'm just like, because it can be extraordinarily loud, and it could prevent, and I believe it's preventing a number of people from even taking the first step. You know, in order to lead, you got to be the one, and moving. But if I can't get myself to move, how am I going to inspire others?
Right. Well, let me just share like the first thing that I really recognized in myself and changed. And it actually goes back to what you were saying just a minute ago, Jay, about, what if I give it my all and it's not that good? So the very first layer of my ego where I was like, wow, that's big, was I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I was in a field of study where I had to write a lot of papers. So reading books, analyzing texts, coming up, with a thesis, putting my ideas down. And I was full of ideas and what I thought were interesting insights. And if I was, amped up on 3 espressos at a cafe, I could bore my buddies, to death for a while with all of my thoughts. But when it came time to sit down and write it, I couldn't get myself to start. And so I'd have these papers that were due, and they'd be a week out, and then 6 days, 4 days, 2 days. And I would see the deadline approaching, like, with this feeling of dread. And I knew I have to start this thing. And I couldn't get myself to start the paper really any earlier than like 8 o'clock the night before it was due. And then in this frenzy of stress, I would pound out this paper. And I always turned my work in on time. But it was okay. I mean, it wasn't great. I didn't have time to find that quote that I knew was really important, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't find it in the book. And I didn't really have time to reread it. And I knew it was kind of half polished, but I handed it in. I got B's, and I got feedback like, well, it's interesting. It's a little superficial. And so in that, I was not getting the results that I wanted. And I knew that the problem was that I was procrastinating. And so this is a situation where I had diagnosed the problem, I procrastinate, and I also knew the solution. Start early, get it done, right? And so why can't I do the thing I know I need to do? And I really felt powerless around this, and felt like, this is a genetic flaw. Like, I'm just undisciplined. It's in my code. I've always been this way. I don't have a backbone. Both my parents are underachievers, so I got like a double whammy of the genetic code.
Blame the parents. I like
Blame
it.
the parents.
Yes.
It's like, no, there's no hope. And so I had this whole story, and I had a lot of embarrassment and self-judgment and even shame, Jay, around this, and compared myself to my friend who seemed to get his work done fine. And that was all just a story that I unconsciously my ego had built for myself that kept me in a very miserable comfort zone. Because really the problem was that I was afraid.
Yeah.
I was afraid that if I started early and I wrote the very best paper that I could, and I got feedback from the professor and a friend, and I polished that paper down to the last comma, and I handed it in, and then I got a B, but that just meant I wasn't smart enough to get an A. Whereas here, I always had an excuse. It was because I was dysfunctional. It was better to be dysfunctional than it was to be incompetent. And that's my trade-off. The ego is constantly making trade-offs, and it's willing to be committed unconsciously to one set of unhelpful behaviors because it protects us from something more uncomfortable. And my wife, she has exactly the opposite. She would much rather be incompetent than appear unreliable. And that makes my skin crawl. I can't imagine being willing to admit the way she does that she's bad at something. But she thinks that me being unreliable is like, the most shameful thing you can do. So I just say that because there's not really a truth around this. We all have sort of internalized norms that we're trying to protect because that's how we play our worth out. And as long as you think I'm competent, I'm okay. And so the problem is that I'm organizing all of my behavior around protecting a place, protecting myself from what's uncomfortable, but maybe the work that I most need to do, maybe the risk that I need to take, whether it's in my undergraduate studies or it's in my business today, or it's one of your listeners going for broke in their business, is maybe the thing that's most needed is actually for me to push into that zone of discomfort that's scariest for me, where the risk of failure is highest, where I might, be awkward or be humiliated in some way because I'm not going to do it well. And my ego isn't going to want to go there. And so as long as I'm protecting my ego first, my purpose and my goals will always pass in the back seat. And even people who are very busy and get a lot done tend to do in their comfort zone. And that limits the impact that we can have. And that here I'm just talking about one individual. If you then have a team or an organization and you add that up, these things can really cascade across a culture.
Yeah, I'm sitting here just thinking about, the idea that basically how I summarize what you're saying is that we feel like we're actually doing ourselves or the world a favor by playing small. If we play smaller, then we always we know ahead of time. There's no damage in knowing that, well, I could have done better, but hey, that's good. There's no risk in finding out that your best isn't good enough, which can be a challenge, because then what? That was the best I knew how to do, and
right.
In the marketplace said that wasn't good enough. Right. That could be a problem. So how does one deal with this? I mean, yes, many of us may be waking up or coming to an awareness now as you're speaking, but what do we do about it? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey, and what I want to say to you is that the number one mistake that I have ever made in business, number one, has been waiting too long to do the books, waiting too long to get the bookkeepers, the accountants, the CPAs, the CFOs involved, and I don't want you to make that same mistake. That mistake cost me over 6 figures, and now for a significant discount, you have the ability to get your books together using FreshBooks. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflowdiary. Again, that's gofreshbooks.com/cashflowdiary. FreshBooks is the easy to use software designed to help you, the small business owner, the freelancer, get organized and save time on invoicing, getting paid faster, keeping those books in order so that it becomes a bonus for you to do your taxes as opposed to a burden. Go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflowdiary and get started today. And now let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, I think the first step is to actually learn to recognize the tension and derailment that you have that comes from your ego, because the thing is, it's not like our ego says, hey, heads up here, I'm feeling a little scared about my outcome, so I'm just going to play small right now and avoid doing this thing. Like, it doesn't come that way, right? It usually comes as blame. The market's not right, or this person didn't do their job, or I'm too busy doing all these other things, so I don't have time to do that. In other words, we're rarely honest with ourselves about the fears that we have that are related to our worth. We have a lot of built-in explanations. So the first thing is to learn to recognize the difference between my mind chatter just chirping away, blaming or judging, and seeing that actually not as anything truthful or valid in and of itself, but more as a red flag that my ego is engaged right now. And so the first process then is to go and look for, okay, so how is my self-worth at stake? What am I afraid of around my competence, my value, my image in my eyes or the eyes of others, and learn to note that. And already one thing you can do is to pay attention, track that over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Each time that you sense that's coming up, and just journal it on a piece of paper. And I think what you'll notice is that after 3 weeks, you'll have had maybe a dozen or 24 moments where you had a lot of angst or agitation going on, and each one felt real to that particular circumstance. But in reality, it was the same, as we call it, ego threat, the same threat to your ego and self-worth. recurring over and over again. There's maybe 2 or 3, like incompetent, not liked, weak. These are what we call dreaded images, ways in which I would really dread appearing in my eyes or the eyes of others. And that gives you information around how your ego most hijacks you, what's most dangerous to it. So that's the first step, is having that awareness that that's what's driving your ship, not necessarily the conscious thoughts that you're having. Got
it. Now, you use this word in your subtitle, and you just said it again, that it hijacks the business. In what ways does this hijacking manifest itself? So you have this, CEO, this entrepreneur, this person who's out there trying to build their thing, whether, that's a 1-person ship or a 1,000-person ship. It hijacks and manifests itself how? Like what would be a business symptom that someone could go, uh-oh, that might be happening right now?
All right. Oh, so many ways, Jay. Okay, so let's imagine there's a founder who has built his or her business up from scratch, and it has an
that'll be easy.
Yeah, right. And let's even imagine they have the opposite pattern, because I gave you my procrastination pattern. So
in the interest of full disclosure, I have your exact same pattern. When you were talking, I was like, oh my God, that's me. But let's keep going.
Exactly. I'm glad we can relate then. So I'm betting there's a bunch of sort of aspiring entrepreneurs who have big ideas but tend not to follow through on them. So I would say those people probably have patterns or tendencies a bit like you and me, and that by not following through and then having judgments of themselves that they're lacking discipline or something, or that's actually allowing them to avoid confronting the reality of, can I actually put this idea into play, and that it's a comfortable dissatisfaction. So that would be one way in which they've got an idea and it's being hijacked, just like my papers are being hijacked by my avoidance. So that's one scenario, and that's probably actually the majority of of the population. But I think that there is another profile, and that's the entrepreneur who just gets up and they go, right? The type A personality. They get things done. They push things forward. They're always working. They're always on. Maybe they have tendencies to be over controlling. It's their way or the highway. They're high standards of quality and excellence and pushing that. And then they try to bring other people in underneath them to help them move the business forward. And I would bet that probably the majority of those people just don't measure up to the founder's, drive and vision. And so that's a more difficult place to see where you're holding yourself back, because you more have the impression you're doing everything, that you're the one, that without you, the whole thing would collapse. But I would say there's a different set of ego tendencies that are hijacking you, because people like that have a tendency probably to think that their way is right. So they're more liable to be right. They're maybe not quite as open to feedback. They may be abrasive and direct, like kind of in a critical way. So they don't think that they avoid conflict. But I would say, I bet that you do. You probably avoid developmental conversations. So someone underneath you isn't doing that well. And instead of maybe having an uncomfortable developmental conversation about it, I'll just take it back and do it myself.
Right.
I'll launch a criticism along the way, but I'm not actually building capacity. I'm not investing in, the BC players to bring them along to really maximize their potential, because it's easier for me to do than it is for me. It's more comfortable, for me to do than it is for me to get into, what might be a challenging developmental conversation, and where I might be wrong, or I might not know how to support the person. And so there, I'm getting a lot done, but probably I'm hijacking myself from actually building the organizational capacity to take my dream to the next level.
Yeah. What's interesting about what you say, one of the things that I was taught a long time ago was It was just a simple phrase. If you build the people will build the business. And I've consistently focused on that, so much so that many of my people have left to go build their own business. But that's a whole nother story in and of itself. But that's, I think what you're saying, it can be scary to entrust your baby. This is your baby to someone else, whether whatever the product or service is, it's yours. It was your idea. You gave birth to it. It's here. And now, Shayne, you're telling me to expect someone else to take care of it? How?
Yeah. And even so, that's totally the case. And even unfortunately, the ego is more subtle and pernicious in ways that are problematic. Like Brandon, my co-author, so he was the CEO of this publicly traded finance company, and one of the things that he realized, I was talking earlier, about you have the superhero and the fraud. So we call that the offensive ego, which is really the proving side, and the defensive ego, which is the play small, protect myself side. And the two work in parallel. And we all have a little bit of both, but we often have tendencies more to one side or the other. And one of the things that he really saw, which I think is a common CEO issue, is that he had this impulse to be number one, right? To be the smartest person in the room. And it was actually
really
yeah, right.
I'm sorry. I was just shocked to hear that, because I'm always striving to be the absolute least intelligent person in the room. That doesn't mean I'm not intelligent. It's just that I want everybody around me to be significantly smarter, because if all the problems have to revolve around, all the solutions come from me, we got a problem, like real bad problem.
All right. So interesting. So Brandon was the opposite. He was the smartest guy in the room. And so the problem is he realized he wasn't able to really hire people that were smarter than him or better than him. So and that was causing all sorts of issues. Now, what's interesting in your case is you're the opposite. And so as I hear you say that, there's something in what you're saying that sounds really healthy, actually, and effective and connected to build the people that build the business. But then I know that we all have egos. So it makes me curious about, because you've mentioned playing small, if there's ways in which you don't fully step into your leadership role or your authority or your guidance, because you're sort of on the opposite end of the pendulum.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head. We've been going through this transition as I have embraced my part of what is necessary to lead the team and play to the same level as the players that are around me, because that's basically, it's like I can't have them playing a bigger game than I'm playing, and that just happened because I found the right people. And it's like, now I've got to step up my game to keep pace and be ahead. And that's exactly, you hit the nail 100% on the head, because it's like, cool, they got it. They don't need me, which is the exact wrong response.
Right. It's just fascinating in that sense. We all, I think we all have ways, and on top of it, it's not earned forever. Like there's so many things that I've gone through and changed that felt vulnerable and scary at the time. And then life changes, and all of a sudden I've got a new cliff I need to leap off of. And I'm like, I didn't fix it all already.
And that's what I wanted. So that's what I was going to ask you. I was like, is there ever a time, because I know there's somebody listening right now going, man, I can't wait till it's never scary again. Does that, I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience is I've never I feel like I'm constantly in this like state of, it's about to get scary next week again.
Yeah.
Does that change? Does that go anywhere? Is it constant?
Yes and no. So I think that when we're not aware of this undercurrent of value and competence that we're injecting into situations, it creates a lot of performance anxiety and stress and tension that when we're young, we can kind of just, willpower our way through. But sometimes as we get older, we're like, man, I'm kind of exhausted here. Right. And so that certainly working on my ego, but I think this is broadly true, and being able to deactivate how much of our value we're sort of putting on top of situations allows us to significantly decrease the amount of stress and tension we have. Just because we're able to sort of have a more balanced view of ourselves, and it doesn't feel like our entire life is at stake with this meeting that we're doing next week. At the same time, if we're growing, if we're pushing ourselves into new skill areas, if we're taking risks around what we want to create, if we're learning to play, taking the risk of playing bigger than we are now, then yeah, we're taking risks with our comfort zone. And I think it's going to be uncomfortable. And to say I'm never uncomfortable again probably means I'm just hanging out in my sort of safe space. And so I think there's this odd tension of working to keep ourselves uncomfortable in our growth, and at the same time recognizing that nothing's really at stake around our worth.
Yeah.
Like that's just a complete invention of our ego, and we can put that aside. And so I think it allows us to actually be uncomfortable longer with less stress.
So what would you say then if someone came to you and said, okay, I hear what you're saying, Shayne, but why should I even bother attempting becoming ego-free? What would happen? What would, what are the benefits, if you will? Like, am I, because it's easy to see sometimes in a marketing piece where the commercial is like, cool, take my pill, lose some weight, do some exercises, feel great. That's cool. What happens after we swallow and adopt your book, Ego-Free Leadership?
Well, maybe the first way there's multiple responses to that question, Jay. And I think the first one is that we have a tendency to really not be aware of the costs of how we operate. And in the book, I try to get into this. I call it the dollar cost of the ecosystem. And just talk about dollars just because that matters to a business. There's a lot of morale and stress costs as well. But part of what happens is that up until now, we've mostly been talking about sort of me as a person, as a leader, as a founder, CEO. But in an organizational setting, if everyone is sort of caught up in these ego-driven behaviors, it ends up generating a lot of toxic side effects in relationships. So it impacts trust. Conflict avoidance causes judgments to be built up. If someone's procrastinating and it has a negative effect on business, other people get frustrated, but maybe they don't know how to talk about it. If I have to be number one and someone else does and someone else wants to be the best, then there's a little bit of internal competition. If the founder tends to be abrasive and kind of directive, then I don't want to be criticized by him or her, so I maybe don't take risks and so all of these things across an organization actually really negatively affect performance. They affect people's creativity, how much risk they're willing to take in their role. And it's not a 10% problem either. Part of what we talk about in the book is, for time, I don't want to tell the whole story of it, but basically there was a strategy in 2006, 2007, 2008 that Encore was trying to put into place, was overseas call centers that every other company in their industry was trying to do as well. Like it was no secret. Everyone was trying to do the same thing, and everybody was failing. And when we got involved with Encore and we started working on the ego dynamics and the distrust and the judgments and the conflict avoidance and the turf wars that were going on between the U.S. leadership and the subsidiary in India, they actually were able to lock in and be one team and take risks with each other and move forward. And when the financial crisis hit, 90% of Encore's industry actually went bankrupt. They just went out of business or they got acquired because the context had been very difficult before the crisis. And when the crisis hit, it blew everything up. During that time, Encore actually was experiencing 300% growth. And the investment that they had made in India was saving them $90 million a year.
Wow.
Whereas everyone else was losing money on it. And so the thing is, what is the cost of ego to your business? It depends. Well, how important is your business? If it's, too small, if it's a small team doing small work, then the costs are small. But if it's a make or break play for your business that's worth $90 million a year, if those teams aren't working together, it's just not going to work.
Wow.
Or it's going to work, poorly. So the first thing is really looking at either the downside cost, or you could also express that as opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. What are you not creating? Mm-hmm. Because in fact, you're not really committed together to taking risks with your ego and with each other to go for the mission of the business. So that would be one thing. And then I would say the benefit is the flip side of that, which is that people are yearning to feel safe at work. They're yearning to not have to watch their back, to feel like they belong to something, to grow, to contribute to something, important. And it's pretty rare that people feel that. A lot of people are at work, trying to succeed, trying to do their job well, trying not to be judged too much, make sure they take their paycheck home, operating in this safe zone, this comfort zone we've been talking about. And so we're pretty significantly under delivering on our potential every day in every organization. And, if you add that up across 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, it's a lot.
Wow.
A lot table.
That's just kind of staggering to think about, either lost opportunity or the cost, when you start thinking about it in a P&L standpoint, and you're just like, wow, there's a lot there. So I know that a number of people who have listened this far probably want to find out more about what you've got going on, where what you guys are up to, and maybe even grab a copy of the book. What's going to be the best way for them to track you down? Tell us how to stalk you online. Yeah. That would be great.
Well, I'm on Twitter at Shayne Hughes. You can get Ego Free Leadership at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. We also have an ebook and we have an audiobook that's actually the three authors. There's three of us. There's also a lady executive who wrote a chapter. So the three of us each share our portions of the book with our own voices. If you go to egofreeleadership.com, that'll bring you to a page on our website that can then link you to, we have downloads, an ebook. We do work, although a lot of our work is with large organizations, we do a ton of work with nonprofits, with founders, with entrepreneurs, even sometimes with couples. So in the end, this work that we've been talking about is about you as a person. Mm-hmm. And so these behaviors we've been discussing in the workplace, they also show up at home with our spouse and partners, with our children. And so this is an opportunity, whether it's through a small fashion like reading the book, or a deeper fashion of really making sure that when you show up in life, you're being guided by what you most want and what you most want to create, and not unconsciously by what keeps you comfortable.
Yeah, I totally appreciate you saying that, because that can easily be the default mode of operation if we're not careful, or if we're just not even aware or even thinking about it. And I just want to be aware of those things. So as we wind down, I've got a question for you, because I'm really curious.
Is this another one of those surprise questions you're gonna?
Yep. Yep. So I'm really curious to hear your answer, though, because I think it's going to be insightful for a number of people. So let's pretend for a moment that we've got someone who is, they're thinking to themselves, you know what, I'm gonna take my life on. I'm going to do this. I'm going to start. I'm going to become that entrepreneur. I'm going to finally grow that business. I'm going to deal with these things and become greater, bigger. And like I know, that in those moments of decision, there's a companion. That companion often comes in the form of a voice, and it tells us what we're not, who we're not, why it won't work. How dare we think we could possibly? And for some people, they're even related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend this time, Shayne, that they are actually going to follow through and do exactly what you suggest. In fact, they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. what would you say and suggest that they do?
So this is following through on their dream, on the thing that they wanted to put into place.
Absolutely.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, just as I listen to that scenario, is the work I teach today. I didn't invent it. I came to it when I was a young man, and it was founded by a couple in France, and in particular by a woman who her whole story is an incredible journey of how this work got created. And so she was my mentor for about 10 years, very instrumental in my life. And one of the things that she used to say was, when you say so what to your fears and you reach for the stars, the magic of being human unfolds. Mm-hmm. And so I like that. And I would say that in the end, write down what your worst fears are of how you might fail or flail or come up short. And by the way, you can notice how 95% of that is connected to your vision of your self-worth, and know, oh, okay, so that's how I'm hung up right now. And I think the question is, how bad do you want this thing you want to do? Do you want it badly enough? Do you care enough to create it that you would be willing to experience these fears? Are you able to say so what to them? Because if you can say so what to them and then still go for what you want, you enter into a different space, a different mental and experiential space where I think you can be freer to go after your goals, because this obsession we have with outcome and success and the fear of failure, we weren't born with it, right? It's not written in the laws of the universe. It's something that we learned, and you don't have to be at the mercy of that.
See, I knew I was going to love your answer. I knew that. I knew that was coming. I was like, I can't wait. Yeah, I definitely appreciate your perspective and the fact that you're willing to put these things down in a book and put them out there to begin to affect change from the top all the way down, because I think at every position, regardless of where someone finds themselves in business today, they'll be able to utilize this information to get to their next steps for sure. And I definitely appreciate all the lessons that you've learned, because I'm sure they were each hard fought and won, and being willing to share them in such a way that we can, use them, assimilate them into our own lives, and for taking the time to share your knowledge, your insight, and your wisdom here with us today at the Cashflow Diary, sir.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, Jay. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? Well, that means you need to go get a copy of Ego-Free Leadership, because between what he said and I said and something that was said, good and well, you said to yourself, man, I'm playing too small, or man, there are people out there that can do a good enough job, and I've got to go figure out how to get out of my own way so that my product, my service, my business can go out there and grow. So go make it happen, because you know what? Sometimes you may not have realized this, but we will never out-earn our own personal growth. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.